As a therapist who's been practicing for the last 15 years, I've heard people tell me I tried therapy and it didn't help far more often than I'd like to hear. Sadly, there are a lot of complex reasons that the therapy system is failing us, I've come to realize. And I say this both as a person who's been a client and as a person who is a therapist. In this video, I'm going to break down the 5 different reasons I think the therapy system is failing us and what I'd like to do to change that. The first thing that keeps a lot of us stuck when it comes to the way therapy is done right now is this pressure on diagnosis. If you're using insurance to see a therapist, they must actually diagnose you. And it has to come from a book called the DSM. It's kind of like the diagnostic manual that's seen as the Bible of how we know if someone's experiencing a mental health disorder, whether it's generalized anxiety or bipolar or PTSD, for example. And to use insurance to pay for therapy, your therapist must spend their time first trying to figure out what they can diagnose you with that therapists will also say is a qualifying diagnosis. There are things, for example, that are in the DSM that insurance won't pay for, such as relationship problems. They don't think that that's a valid enough reason to seek therapy. And so your therapist has to spend time playing this mental game of trying to figure out what diagnosis you actually qualify for that's valid, that insurance will actually pay for. Then once you get that diagnosis, they also have to figure out what types of therapy your insurance will provide for, and if there's a cap to how many sessions you can receive. So up front, there's this pressure on the therapist who's taking insurance to try to figure out how to make sure that they can get these sessions reimbursed that really takes away from the healing process. Fundamentally, I think that this pressure to diagnose is really distracting from healing. First of all, it sends the message that there is a perfect or right diagnosis for someone, but it's really complicated. And there are things that people know that they struggle with, like codependency or complex PTSD, that actually aren't in the DSM. And the DSM is a flawed manual. It comes from human beings. We're flawed. And it changes over time. For example, if you've ever heard the term manic depressive, that's what bipolar used to be, and now we call it bipolar. Autism has changed in the DSM. And I think most tellingly around how the DSM is a flawed manual is the fact that up until the early 1970s, being gay or lesbian was considered a psychiatric mental disorder. That it was seen as something that was fundamentally wrong with someone that could be treated with mental health work, family therapy, psychiatry, what have you. And it was actually included in the DSM until 1987, homosexuality as a personality disturbance or a sexual deviation. And fortunately, they removed it because we have the right to love and be intimate with who we want to without it being a problem. But we can see that human error, human judgment influences the DSM. So to put all this pressure on diagnosis is flawed. It's limiting. It takes away from the healing work that can be done. And I've spent so much time, unfortunately, having to support people in this process of being so confused about what their perfect diagnosis is. Sometimes I see people who think if they can just find their right diagnosis, then they can heal. But it's really problematic. As I said, there are things that are legitimate, like codependency, that are not in the DSM. And also, depending on where you're at different times in your life, different stressors, different professionals that you see, you might get a different diagnosis. All clinicians have a different framework that they work from. And so some people might lean towards seeing ADHD or others bipolar or others a personality disorder, just to name a few examples. I'm a big believer that we want to take a little bit of time to identify what kind of concern resonates with us, like non-secure attachment or codependency or relationship issues, Because then once we name that problem, we can tame it, to kind of paraphrase Dr. Dan Siegel. Name it to tame it. We get an idea of what we're struggling with, and then we just use that cognitive effort to focus on healing rather than finding some perfect diagnosis. So I really think that that's the first problem in the current system of therapy that's keeping a lot of us stuck. The second issue that kind of feeds into this is just like there's no perfect diagnosis, there's no perfect therapy model. Some estimates say that there are hundreds of therapy models now. Well, maybe only a handful are super common, like internal family systems or dialectical behavior therapy or cognitive behavior therapy. But this abundance of models can sometimes make people feel that if only they can find the right model with the right therapist, then they can heal. But until then, they're stuck. But I really think that healing has been far too overcomplicated in the field of therapy and mental health. Many issues that people come to therapy for, kind of outside of the ones that really do need medication management, such as schizophrenia or bipolar, many of these concerns, such as relationship problems, toxic relationship patterns, codependency, non-secure attachment, complex trauma, kind of struggling to say no with people, struggling to value yourself, all of these things that are really common reasons that people come to therapy. Oh, including just like a general sense of being unhappy, feeling overly stressed, feeling anxious in your life, like uncertain a lot of the time. A lot of these things can be treated with very simple, fundamental skills and steps. I've come to discover in 15 years of practice that there's probably only about 5 core things that we need to truly heal in our lives for a wide range of concerns. But when you look at the therapy models, when you look at the literature, it can seem so complicated. And really, a lot of these models are just using the same concepts but with different language. I used to have the goal of developing my own therapy model early in my career. But the longer I practice, the more I realize I don't really think that's needed at this point. I think we really need to simplify the language and come back to basics and really remember that there's probably just a handful of things, like 5 things is what I've identified, that really truly allow us to heal, and different models are just using different language. Of course, if certain language resonates with you, you want to use that, but we don't want to get too caught up in this idea that there's a perfect model. Just to highlight this idea, different therapy models such as dialectical behavior therapy will talk about mindfulness, but they're going to use different language for it. So in cognitive behavior therapy, we're mindful of our thoughts, just as we practice mindfulness in DBT. But that's a unifying thing. That's one of the core things that helps us heal is mindfulness, by the way. It's self-awareness, slowing ourselves down, really thinking about how we want to respond rather than being so reactive in our lives. Another problem with therapy, at least as an American that I see, is the way it's done in an individualistic society. So the American culture really values self-reliance. There's this common feeling that needing other people is weakness or codependency. For example, even the idea of needing basic encouragement or comfort from others is sometimes interpreted as weakness. I have clients say to me, oh, aren't I just being codependent because they want their partner to, celebrate their wins, for example, with them? It's like, no, absolutely not. Human beings need connection. It's actually a non-negotiable biological need. Researchers found that loneliness, for example, is the equivalent on our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It literally does hurt us to not be in connection with other people. And another study that was done over 80 years by Harvard found that the single greatest predictor of health at age 80 is having close, happy relationships at age 50. Our relationships with other people are a non-negotiable for true mental health and happiness. And sometimes I think in an individualistic culture, especially when we're doing individual therapy, that importance is sometimes put in the wayside. I think sometimes we can overly encourage clients to self-care But sometimes it comes to the detriment of having time then to connect with other people. Or, of course, we want to support clients in setting boundaries and saying no where they need to. But discomfort isn't always a sign that we need to set boundaries. Human relationships are a lot more nuanced because trauma, for example, can confuse what's safe and unsafe. One of my favorite quotes I've ever come across to explain this is by clinician Deb Dana. And she explains that trauma replaces patterns of connection with patterns of protection. So as human beings in our optimal state of health, when we feel truly safe, like within ourselves, we are designed to connect. Connection comes pretty easily. We're not in a we're not experiencing social anxiety when we're in a place of true well-being, because those just are two opposite experiences. But unfortunately, when we experience trauma, which is really just anything that was too much to process at the time that it happened, we can learn that connecting with other people is dangerous. And that makes sense why we can interpret that depending on different experiences, like toxic relationships, abuse, neglect. And while that makes sense, we end up building walls with other people that actually prevent the basic need for community from being manifested into our lives. For example, if someone has a non-secure attachment, if they have avoidant attachment, they might interpret someone wanting to be close or vulnerable with them as danger. They might feel suffocated, when in reality, they really would benefit from learning how to lean in and tolerate that discomfort, breathe through it, be mindful through it, so they can reap all the benefits of a close connection. We want to sometimes challenge our natural ways of interacting with other people and lean into close relationships because we need community and connection with others to truly heal, to thrive, and be happy. And I think sometimes in an individualistic culture, we can overemphasize self-reliance, like, oh, you have to affirm yourself. Don't expect anyone else to do it. And yeah, we can't expect anyone else to do it, but in close relationships, people are going to affirm us and encourage us. Like, that's human and natural. It's not codependent. So I think sometimes that gets lost. Another big factor, of course, which I have experienced a ton of personal internal conflict and sadness and discomfort around this truth, is the issue of affordability when it comes to therapy. We either have therapy that is often too expensive for most people, because many therapists are private pay only. They don't work with insurance. And so people genuinely cannot afford it. Or we have, difficulty with finding therapists who are in network because they're fully booked. There's, not as many therapists taking insurance. And this lack of affordability around insurance can make it really hard to sustain seeing the therapist as often as you might need to make genuine progress. There's clinical recommendations. For example, I've worked with clients where I know they really would need weekly therapy to see the gains that they want to see. We need to get that ball moving. We got to build that snowball effect. But they can't afford that. Maybe they can only come in once or twice a month. That's going to greatly limit the progress they can feel, and obviously feel very disappointing around what they're receiving from therapy, which is completely understandable. But it really leads to the fifth issue that I see way too commonly that's impacting the success of therapy, both for clients and for therapists, which is therapist burnout. Because we have really two camps of therapists. We have the therapists who are taking insurance, but there's a lot of issues with taking insurance. First, you have to get that valid diagnosis. I've had clients denied for valid health care because the insurance kept deciding that that diagnosis wasn't qualifying, even though in other cases they've accepted the same diagnosis. And clinicians sometimes talk about going months without being paid for sessions, if they're even paid at all. And it's a much lower rate to receive the therapy rate through insurance than going private pay for the therapist. So they have to see way more clients than they would need to otherwise. And they're experiencing a high level of burnout. These clinicians who are trying to manage, paying their business bills, paying their personal bills, and keeping everything afloat, especially with the uncertainty of insurance reimbursement And that's going to naturally lead to burnout. This is emotionally taxing work. Being a therapist is emotionally taxing if we're truly present with people. The only way this work isn't taxing, like cognitively, like that we can observe, is if we're numb. If we're in our frozen state when it comes to our nervous system, if we're dysregulated, if we're numb, we might not view this work as taxing as we would otherwise as therapists. And so that's the only way this work isn't taxing. It's not a boundary violation that your therapist can only hold so many stories from other people, that there's a limit to that, that there's a tax emotionally to sitting in people's heaviness and being a witness to their heaviness and their transformation. There's an emotional cost to that. And for many therapists, that's part of the work. They genuinely love showing up for people in such a heartfelt way. But there's either the camp where people are burning themselves out because they have to see way more clients than is sustainable for them. And then when you have a therapist who is burnt out, you're naturally not going to make as much progress as you would otherwise. It's been proven that human nervous systems co-regulate each other. So what that means is if you have a therapist who's burnt out, they're in that frozen, numb state, you can't access their nervous system for safety. You can't go, oh, that's what safety looks like. And on this like unconscious embodied way, start to feel what safety looks like. You can learn skills from them. You can get lots of genuinely helpful tools and insights, but you're not going to get that same level of regulation. Like, I'm safe with this person. Oh, I finally understand what it feels like to feel safe. If your therapist is burnt out. And I am not shaming any therapist who's burnt out. I think the therapy system is failing us. But that is just a truth. And then on the other side of things, my camp, which I have a ton of internal conflict around, is I have set my rate at a rate that is quite high because I have really thought about, there's only a handful of sessions I can do a week that allows me to, pay my bills, but also be emotionally regulated, to be safe. And when I'm in an emotionally regulated, safe zone where I'm not getting taxed out by doing too much emotionally taxing work, I can show up with my clients in a really regulated, safe, present way. Because I really prioritize my balance, my self-care, I then can be present for them. And when I'm present for them, I can be really kind of creative and intuitive around what's needed at that time versus just kind of having like a set handout that I'm going to give that session. Like I can go, oh, they're talking about this problem. I'm going to teach this DBT or IFS skill, for example. My presence allows me to be feel safe, to be creative, and to be responsive in a genuinely relational way. And so while I feel sadness around how exclusive my rate can be, it's also what I've needed to do to feel safe and role model safety and be present for my clients in that way. But all of these critiques, I've spent years thinking about these disappointments in my field. I wanted to be a therapist since at the time I was about 8 years old. I saw one on TV and I was like, oh, that's what I'm meant to do. And I love being a therapist. I feel like it is such a privilege in my life to get to walk with people in such a courageous, vulnerable way. And I never thought I would become critical in my field. Never. And so all of this has come as a deep surprise for me the longer I've been a therapist. But I've really thought about how there's like some systemic issues at play here. And it limits my ability to live into my greatest purpose. My greatest purpose in life is to have an expanded ripple effect of positivity. I want to help as many people heal as possible. And my books help with that, of course, but I can only see a handful of clients, as I said. And then I also have the guilt around what my rate is. And I know that it's not accessible for everyone. So I've spent a long time thinking about all of these complicated factors that can make therapy less effective for us, even when we're willing to change, even when we're taking that courageous, vulnerable step. And finally, I've realized the change that I want to bring into the world from these 15 years of practice and seeing all the amazing things about therapy, but also these honest critiques. And it's led me to develop my Confidently Authentic Collective. And it's based on this idea that we need community to heal. We need safe connections with other people to heal. We need regulated guides to help us understand what embodied safety looks like. And one of the key principles from my Confidently Authentic Collective is we can really simplify healing. Everything I talk about, whether it's here, in my books, in my collective, is really centered on the fact that there are just a handful of things that allow us to heal. One, as I mentioned before, is mindfulness. The other is actually reclaiming joy, play, fun, and lightness. I think way too many of us, when we think about healing work, and I lived in this camp for a long, long time, thought of this work as heavy, serious, important, hard. And while absolutely healing is arduous at times, it also necessarily includes joy, fun, lightness, and play, and reclaiming these in our lives. And a lot of us have lost that, like from childhood, is an essential part to healing. I'll never be truly happy in life if I never let myself relax and enjoy myself, for example. And so that's essential. Simplified, joy and play, community, and also the fact that it should be accessible. When you're ready to make that courageous step towards healing, the help that you need should be available to you in an accessible way. And to kind of kickstart my Confidently Authentic community, I've decided to have first a founders circle. This founders circle is going to be intentionally capped at only 15 members because we're going to meet 2 times a month for an hour for some education, time for emotional exploration, and to really honor where each of us is at in that moment in time, to figure out where we're really at. And each lesson, future journal prompts are all based on where people truly are at in the community. It's truly responsive and organic. This is an alive experience. It's not just a formula like some models might be of therapy. And in this alive experience, to support integration, you will get a weekly journal prompts, or like a handful, not too time consuming, to support you with self-awareness and integration of every theme that we're working through for the month or for the next couple weeks. That's truly honoring where you're at. And then you'll have a discussion board where you can ask questions and, connect with other people and truly share wins if you like. I think that that's really important to celebrate our progress. I'm so excited about offering this founder circle because it addresses these key problems and it's, simplifying healing. We're not worried about diagnosis. This isn't therapy. This is a healing space. Yes, it's guided by all my expertise as a clinician, but it's just a healing space. It's simplified. We're not worrying about labels. We're gonna make sure that, in this space, we're really intentional about only 15 members. There's gonna be a sense of safety among us. I'm committed to making sure that I show up in a safe, regulated way for you to just I'll help you experience that co-regulation. And then finally, I have priced this whole offer for the Founder Circle at just $97 a month because accessibility is so important to me. I think when we're really ready to make that courageous change to heal and change, we should be able to access that support. I think it's a basic right, really. And so I've priced it at a place where it's definitely less than the average therapy session, just one per month. And it's even less sometimes than a couple co-pays for people in the month for therapy. And you're going to get all of this for just $97 a month. And this community is really designed for people who really want to, experience these benefits for at least 3 to 6 months, but really as long as it feels aligned for you. This is for people who want to do the ongoing work of community building with others and internal relationship building with themselves to truly heal. If this is resonating with you, if you're really ready to make a change and you like this different approach to healing, I invite you to check out the link below where I go through this offering in more detail, and you can join there. Again, it's going to be closed once we hit 15 members. So if it's resonating with you, no scarcity ploys, just honesty. If this is resonating with you, I invite you to join us now. Our first call is going to be at the beginning of January, and we're going to go from there. And so if this resonates with you, I'd love to see you. It is a deep honor of my life to get to support you and live into my vision of having that positive ripple effect. I am sending you so much love, whether this resonates with you or not, and I look forward to connecting with you in the next video.